Welcome to the BSG Trainees Podcast. Today we are joined by Professor Dhiraj Tripathi, Consultant Hepatologist and Liver Transplant Physician at University Hospitals Birmingham, and Honorary Professor with the University of Birmingham. He qualified in 1994 from the University of Edinburgh. His particular area of interest is in portal hypertension, and he has published extensively in this field, including an excellent recent guideline on transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic stent shunt in the management of portal hypertension. He was also recently elected to the BSG Council and is currently chair of the Portal Hypertension Special Interest Group for the British Association of the Study of the Liver. He is chief investigator for the ongoing Calibre trial, a randomised controlled trial of carvedilol versus variceal band ligation in primary prevention of variceal bleeding and cirrhosis. Outside of hepatology, he is regional counsellor for the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow and member of the NICE Interventional Procedures Advisory Committee. Welcome to the podcast, Dhiraj.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. And first of all, can we kick off with you telling us a little bit about your inspiration to go into medicine and then become a hepatologist?
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast, which is obviously aimed at trainees. And I'm very delighted to share my journey and experiences. So what really attracted me to medicine? Well, I suppose this is something that others have said. I come from a medical family. So my father's was a retired GP. So I've always been surrounded by medicine. And in those days, the GP would be single-handed. There was no out-of-hours service. And so my dad used to be woken up by the bleep. Sometimes I used to be, and you'd think, why would you want to go into medicine? But my father was my inspiration, and he loved working with people, with patients, and seeing that he made a difference made me really interested in medicine. So I went through the usual processes, which I think haven't changed a great deal. And then graduated from University of Edinburgh all those years ago, and went through the normal training pathway. So I was the pre kind of SPRs, like in my days it was SHOs, and then going on to registrars. That was the way it was. And then the new system, the Kalman system, was introduced. But before even getting to get a numbered post, I completed a period of research, and really that was thanks to particularly gastroenterologist in a hospital in Lanarkshire, which is actually no longer there. It used to be called Law Hospital. It's been replaced by Wishaw General. And he really put me in touch with the liver unit in Edinburgh, and particularly Professor Hayes. And it's quite strange, this story, really. So I was on leave, and I had communicated. There was no real emails in those days or anything else. So I communicated by email, by letter to Professor Hayes, expressing an interest in hepatology and research in particular. And I didn't really hear anything. And the next time I hear from Professor Hayes was he actually phoned me and left a message on the answering machine. So I picked up the message on my return from leave, and he said, there's a position for a locum registrar in the liver transplant unit in Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. Are you interested? And I kind of jumped up and down, and I phoned him the next working day. Unfortunately, the post was still available. That's kind of how I got my foot in the door, really, and that's how my specialist training started.
Fantastic. And I mean, if you grew up with a bleep in the house, I'm surprised you still pursued medicine, but we're glad you did.
Yeah, it was an experience, but it's just the difference that doctors make to people, to patients, and also the patients' families as well. It's about the whole. It's not just about one person; it's about the family as well.
Absolutely. And was that research that kind of set you on the path, with your fascination with portal hypertension?
Absolutely, absolutely. So Professor Hayes, who was my supervisor when I joined the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh all those years ago, he had a particular interest in portal hypertension, and he had set up quite a nice lab, if you could call it that, where he performed phase 2 studies, doing hemodynamic studies measuring the hepatic venous pressure gradient and drug trials. And I was not the first, really. There were my predecessors included Rajiv Jalan, Adrian Stanley, and Ewan Forrest. So we were all involved with the phase 2 portal hypertension studies. But I was particularly interested in the drug therapy for portal hypertension, beta blockers in particular. And I did a number of hemodynamic studies with the carvedilol, but also endothelin receptor antagonists, which was a very involved study requiring repeated visits. And I managed to complete my research, almost complete my research in the just over 2 years. And as a result of the my time in research or out of program time, I was able to complete a thesis on clinical and hemodynamic studies in portal hypertension. So I was awarded an MD for my clinical research. But I've always had this interest in beta blockers and the effect of beta blockers in portal pressure, and so that really led on to the big trial, which is the carvedilol versus band ligation. So this is the first ever trial, phase 3 trial of carvedilol in portal hypertension in patients with viruses that have not bled. So I was involved with that, and that really led from the hemodynamic studies that I was fortunate to be involved with when I started my research in Edinburgh.
It must be really exciting to have been part of something that's had such a massive clinical impact on so many patients' lives.
Indeed, this is. I mean, I didn't know it at the time. Of course, we did. As with clinical trials, you have a hypothesis and you do a study, and you're not sure what the outcome is. So it's very much pure research. Because, as you said, this has not. There's never been a previous phase 3 study in this context, in this group of patients. And in those days, it's still a relatively large study, just over 150 participants over 5 sites. So a relatively large study, and we did show that carvedilol was indeed effective. And I'm very grateful to all the collaborators. Really, this would not have worked with that collaboration from all the other sites. So this was in the days before we had proper clinical trials units. So really, I mean, it was myself and other research fellows. We didn't have a big university or other clinical trials unit behind us. So it was quite a different time. But Peter Hayes was always very supportive, and as were my other clinical supervisors. And I think this kind of the importance of research is kind of coming around again. It's absolutely important, and it improves patients' lives, saves patients' lives, and I think the carvedilol trial is a real example of that. And as you said, it has had an enormous impact internationally in the management of patients with portal hypertension.
Absolutely, and obviously another crucial part of your job is as a transplant physician. Was that something that was a natural fit with your work on portal hypertension, and how do you enjoy that work?
So thank you, James. So when I started my specialist training, it was actually working as a transplant registrar in the Scottish Liver Transplant Unit all those years ago. So I was introduced to transplantation at a very early stage. And in those days, the registrar did pretty much everything. So we were going around, we had twice daily ward rounds and doing all the liver biopsies ourselves, and even putting in lines and things ourselves as well. So we did have intensive care support. And I was also involved in transplant research as well. initially, and I did some work on the impact of tips in patients in liver transplantation, and so that was we did two publications in that topic. The first was in Edinburgh, and then the second was in Birmingham, which is a collaborative effort. And I find transplantation absolutely fascinating. There's still, there have been some huge advances over the last few years, and Birmingham in particular has been one of the major players in the recent research with regards to machine perfusion.
We've talked quite a bit on this podcast about mentorship, and you've mentioned some really inspirational people in your life. How important would you say mentorship has been to you?
Very, very, very important, because as somebody who's in training, it is a lot of uncertainty, and also there isn't the same amount of confidence as somebody who's fully trained. At times, my self-esteem was tested. So was I doing the right thing? Is this going to work out? I'm spending all this time in the hemodynamic studies. Is this, what is it all for? But the support from, it's not just really from one person. It's actually the group. Support from the group is really important, and we're not just talking about the medical staff, but also the other. Worked very closely with the nurses, and even Professor Hayes, the secretary, was so supportive. Do you know, in those days, we didn't used to. So nowadays, you would submit a journal, you'd upload a few files, and then just click the submit after you've done a few checks. But in those days, we used to have to send everything, in paper. So I remember spending a Friday evening just printing out multiple copies. They want 9 or 10 copies or something daft like that. So I just couldn't do it, and I just couldn't get the photocopy to work. So I had to wait until Monday, and Professor Hayes' secretary showed me how to make the photocopier work. Small things like that can make a difference. But everybody was really so supportive at that time, and it's really thanks, obviously, to the leadership of Peter Hayes, and particularly also, Rajiv Jalan was a real inspiration to me as well, because he just finished his research at that, completing his training, and moved on to fresh pastures. But he was a real inspiration and real proof of how one can combine clinical work and research.
Brilliant. I mean, imagine that, a photocopier standing in the way of the publication of a...
It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, you wouldn't dream of that these days, would you? But in those days, there was no online submission system, so it had to be done the old way. And also the mail as well. You had to send it through a special. It's quite expensive sending it by mail, and again, you needed the support from the secretary for all that.
Absolutely. And your publication record now is prolific. So congratulations on your recent publications in gut, on tips and portal hypertension, and on liver transplantation in frontline gastroenterology. Both of those have been really well received, and I've certainly found them useful as clear and thorough summaries. How do you find balancing your academic commitments nowadays with your clinical commitments?
So yes, thank you for that. Yes, it's I have to say those publications were, in terms of teamwork, I mean, the real example of teamwork. You'll see there are many authors, co-authors in the publications, the tips and the liver transplant guidelines, and the co-authors. It also includes patient representatives who worked incredibly hard. Actually, they joined every single guidelines development group meeting, and really made some very helpful comments and suggestions. So it's very, very much a team effort, but it is a lot of work. But I was very lucky to have a very supportive team who would really always deliver to kind of deadlines, and as a result, the publications came out in nice journals. So finding the balance is, I'm learning. I'm still learning, I have to say. So the academic side is probably, so I would say I'm more 50-50 now. I probably used to be 70% clinical and 30% academic, but becoming a bit more academic as a result of the recent, the Caliber trial, and also a trial that we're about to launch on tips in acute variceal bleeding. And also I've taken on a role as a clinical director of research for University Hospitals Birmingham. So it's important to realize that there's only so much you can do in the time. And I think if I was starting off as a consultant, I'd probably be thinking more, spending more in doing clinical activity, which is, I think absolutely right, because you need to really be very confident and find your feet with regards to the clinical medicine. But as you become more and more senior and become more confident, you develop interest in particular areas. And to do well in something, you really do need to pursue your interest. And so this is what I've done over the last 5 or 6 years. I have particular ideas. So everybody, all medics are incredibly bright, and everybody's got good ideas. But it's to to see those ideas through. That's the real challenge. And there are opportunities along the way, but you don't always get things the first time. It's important to keep looking for opportunities, keep trying again and again, and you never know. The idea that you had in your mind might actually be exactly what the funder was looking for in the grant application. So no time is really wasted. So even if you're putting together a submission or a grant and you aren't successful the first time, that time is absolutely not wasted, because that your mind is, you're richer for that experience. And so I think this is what's happened over the last few years, and I've been lucky and fortunate in having very good support from my clinical colleagues. This is also an important area. So you do need to speak to your clinical colleagues and really speak to them about your passion. This is, what I've. These are the ideas I have, and just bring them along, and the clinical colleagues will support you. That's been my experience, certainly with where I work at this time. And I'm very lucky and very thankful for the support I've received from my immediate peers and also from the institution as well. So it's a number of things, but I'm still, nothing is 100% perfect, but I think I've got a reasonable balance at the moment. I'm comfortable with the amount of clinical work, and I don't think I'd want to drop to below 50% clinical commitments, because I'm still doing my own calls, for example, because I enjoy the kind of hands-on emergency care, and I do endoscopy still, so I'm still going to keep all of that going.
I think that message of no time wasted will come as real solace to trainees writing grant applications.
Indeed, yeah. It's never wasted, because even at this time within NIHR, there's the opportunity to submit an expression of interest. So if you have a good idea for a research study, you can just submit an expression of interest, and even if you're not successful, that they will pay attention to that idea, and it may inform future funding opportunities or commission briefs. So this is what I've learned over the years. Time you spend doing grant applications, time in publications, I don't think that time is really ever wasted, because you do become richer for that experience.
Great. And where do you see the major advances lying within hepatology over the next decade? And feel free to narrow down to portal hypertension if you wish.
In the last few years, I don't need to tell you that huge advances in management of hepatitis C, in particular the directly acting antivirals, where we're seeing clinical efficacy and effectiveness of well over 90%. And we're really talking about real world evidence, and it is absolutely remarkable how much this has advanced over the last few years. And the next few years, a disease area that's particularly, although it's not my kind of main interest, is fatty liver disease. I see a number of developments in fatty liver disease with regards to drug trials. There's many trials and a lot of industry funding for these clinical trials. So I'm predicting that there may be significant advances in the area of fatty liver disease with the new drugs that are in the process of clinical trials, or may even be in the process of being licensed for fatty liver disease, although we're not quite there yet. With regards to portal hypertension, I think the challenge at the moment is, when do we start these therapies for portal hypertension? We just published, there's a long-term follow-up of the original carvedilol versus banding study. This was published just recently, and we showed that the survival was better in the beta blocker arm, and that was quite an important observation. Although it wasn't a full RCT, but it was a follow-up of a previous RCT, but still it makes you wonder, is the effect of beta blockers purely on portal pressure, or are there other pleiotropic effects that we don't quite fully understand? For example, the improved survival was not necessarily due to liver-related morbidity or mortality. It was other things. So I think we need to understand a bit more about the impact of therapies at different stages in the liver disease. We sometimes refer to them as the Baveno stages of kind of early compensated and clinically significant portal hypertension, which moves on to the decompensated stage, and then you have patients that can develop acute decompensation or acute on chronic liver failure, and then they can recompensate and improve. So what we want to do is to really prevent the decompensation. That's an area that I'm particularly interested in at this time. When do we start drug therapy to prevent this decompensation, ascites, encephalopathy, or bleeding? Do we start as soon as the patient is diagnosed with cirrhosis? Do we have any surrogate markers to guide us with regards to the patients that, with regards to stratifying patients that may be at higher risk of developing these complications? The main marker that we have, and this is what I did a lot of in my research, was measuring the hepatic venous pressure gradient. That's invasive and not really widely available in many centres outside of academic units. So it's by no means ideal, but it is the gold standard. And there's a lot of research at this time trying to discover surrogate markers of decompensation in patients with early cirrhosis. There was a recent Prodisky trial which showed that beta blockers can reduce the risk of decompensation and death as a composite endpoint, but we need more evidence. We really need a non-invasive surrogate marker to stratify these patients, because it may be that not everybody benefits. So there's a bit more work to do there, not just looking at the beta blockers, but also looking at the more mechanistic aspects, for example, inflammation, bacterial translocation. I think these are areas that require further study.
And what would you say is your proudest achievement to date?
So, well, I suppose it sounds a bit corny, but apart from kids, the other in terms of my professional life, I have to say it goes back to my time doing research in Scotland, in Edinburgh Infirmary, and really working on the original carvedilol versus banding trial. Didn't know at the time that it would make such an impact, but I'm extremely proud of working and feel privileged to be working in such a supportive environment, and to have made such an impact nationally and internationally. And the story goes on, as I've alluded to. The story goes on. It's certainly not the end. There's still much more to be discovered.
Wow, and so yeah, you mentioned your family. What are your loves outside of medicine?
So I've got two young children, so spending as much time as I can, and they very much appreciate it. They know when daddy's busy, but they don't like it when daddy's busy. But when daddy's free, I make the most of my time with my children. Now, before all of this events in the last year, I used to love going out to concerts and and gigs in particular, and I'm really sad I can't really do that at this time. So music is a real love of mine, and both my children love playing their instrument. My son plays the violin, and my daughter plays the piano. So, and we can spend the whole evening just listening to the kids playing. So this is my kind of live entertainment at the moment, listening to my children playing on the piano and playing the violin. It's we can do that all evening, and it's so relaxing. And at the end of a hard day, to listen to some music played by particularly your children. But that's something, hopefully, of with the country opening up, that I might be able to go to a concert in the near future. I'm very much looking forward to that. And the other thing that we all love as a family is travel, and the kids love going up in aeroplane. We were a bit apprehensive initially, but they just love going in the airplane, and they even like the food, believe it or not. They even like the food, the airplane food, which is unusual.
And and to leave off, if you had to pass on one piece of advice for an early career gastroenterology trainee or someone considering applying for a training post in gastroenterology or budding hepatologists, what would you say?
Yeah, so it's very important that you're not never to think that you're alone, because you're always part of a team, and that is really, in my experience, the key to success. And it's you. Obviously, you have to have the internal drive, but also those around you that make you who you are. And if you have a passion or something that's driving you, really go for that. But also speak to others around you. Take others in your journey as well. And I find that people that do that are usually more successful than those that like to go out, do it on their own. So I think just never give up. Work with others, bring others along, work in a team, and never think that whatever you've done is time wasted. Any particular, if you're pursuing a grant application, even if you are not successful at that time, that experience is of great value, and makes you richer and makes you more better for that experience, and also improves your chances of success in any future grant applications.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Diraj.
Not at all. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the British Society of Gastroenterology Trainees Podcast. Please do listen to our other episodes available at www.bsg.org.uk/trainee-podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes and Pocket Casts. And don't forget to give us a rating and leave a review wherever you listen.